groups in the region and have suffered the systematic loss of their lands, with severe consequences to their well-being. Nevertheless, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC, has found some progress in recent years related to the recognition of their territorial rights and political participation. There have also been improvements in their living conditions, with greater access to healthcare and education. The United Nations has championed the promotion of Indigenous peoples' rights and relies on 3 special resources for this purpose: a permanent forum, experts, a special rapporteur. At a regulatory level, Indigenous peoples are protected by Convention number 169 of the International Labor Organization of 1989, which recognized their rights as peoples for the first time, and the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples of 2007, which considers these peoples' rights to self-determination. In the context of these efforts, ECLAC calls for the region's countries to put policies in practice to end inequality suffered by Indigenous peoples. Policies based on human rights standards and the perspectives and contributions of these peoples. This is crucial for the construction of a new development agenda beyond 2015, with equality at its heart.
The SDG Gateway is a web platform aiming to become a key factor for coordination and availability of the regional assets of the United Nations system in Latin America and the Caribbean. The main goal of this online knowledge management center is to serve as a meeting point and reference to all the information related to the Sustainable Development Goals, including activities, informational resources, statistics, regional data, specific analytic tools, and knowledge products developed and provided by the United Nations Development System in the region in response to its member countries. Visit this important multi-stakeholder platform and get to know more about this online regional knowledge management center. The COVID-19 Observatory in Latin America and the Caribbean is a platform promoted by ECLAC at the request of the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, CELAC. The observatory tracks the public policies that Latin American and Caribbean countries are implementing to limit the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic in the region. Through reports and documents, it offers analysis of the economic and social impacts that these policies will have at the national and sectorial levels, in addition to supporting the review and monitoring in the medium and long term. In an interactive map, those interested can clearly visualize the actions taken by each country in the areas of movements, health, economy, labor, social protection, education, and gender. Visit ECLAC's COVID-19 Observatory and access updated information on policy measures to address the crisis in the region.
In the very year that the United Nations launched the Decade for Action to ignite a more purposeful understanding of the part of the international community towards advancing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the world has confronted unprecedented change in the specter of COVID-19. The multi-dimensioned impact of this pandemic has served to dramatize the true scale of the vulnerability of the small, heavily indebted, undiversified economies of the Caribbean, and has forced creative exploration of every opportunity within the reach of our member states to secure urgent relief. The 2020 meetings of the Caribbean Development Roundtable and the Caribbean Development and Cooperation Committee will offer space for taking stock of the progress so far made in persuading the international community to extend this financial support needed, middle income status notwithstanding, and to dialogue on those strategies that will take you from vulnerability to resilient development, from economic peril to recovery and dynamic growth. It is an opportunity to consider how together we strengthen partnerships for action that is responsive to the unique vulnerabilities of the Caribbean. and that assures tangible progress through the application of innovative problem solving in these precarious times.
To support countries in the follow-up and monitoring of the medium and long-term progress of the crisis caused by COVID-19, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean has produced a series of documents on the evolution and the effects of the pandemic in the region. These publications have been included in the COVID-19 Observatory in Latin America and the Caribbean, which compiles and makes available public policies that the 33 countries of Latin America and Caribbean region are taking to limit the impact of the pandemic, as well as the analysis of the economic and social impacts that these policies will have at the national and sectorial levels. ECLAC studies include a collection of special reports COVID-19 that deal with the economic and social effects of the crisis, as well as sectorial publications on specific topics such as the production of statistics, the right to life and health of older people, people with disabilities, the region's food systems, digitization opportunities, the care system, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in the New Global Context, among other topics. This economic and social analysis will be updated as relevant information related to the COVID-19 pandemic emerges. Visit the ECLAC Observatory COVID-19 and access all these reports and updated information on policy measures to face the crisis in the region.
The Escazú Agreement is the first regional environmental treaty of Latin America and the Caribbean and offers an unprecedented tool to tackle these challenges. The Escazú Agreement contributes to the right to a healthy environment and to sustainable development of present and future generations, guaranteeing access to environmental information, public participation in environmental decision-making, and access to justice in environmental matters. It is the first treaty in the world to protect human rights defenders in environmental matters.
The introduction of the annual report of ECLAC on outlook of foreign trade of Latin America and the Caribbean 2021 in a virtual mode, as I said, from Santiago over a Zoom platform of cepal.org and the YouTube and an ECLAC and on YouTube and Facebook. So I'd like to greet all of you in the transmission, especially the journalists, the colleagues who have signed in to participate, as well as our ECLAC colleagues following from their various workstations. The presentation of these documents will be conducted by Alicia Bárcena, the Executive Secretary, who will be offering the main conclusions of this report. After her presentation, as always, we will have a Q&A round with the journalists. Please be reminded, those attending this session, send your questions in writing using the chat pod of the Zoom or to the email address conferenciaprensa@cepal.org. Without further ado, it's a real honor to offer the floor to the Secretary of ECLAC, Alicia Bárcena. Good morning. You have the floor. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. It's a pleasure for me to present this report on the foreign trade outlook in Latin America and the Caribbean. And as always, this is a collective product with the involvement of many people. Here I have Mario G. Moli, the Assistant Executive Secretary, and Mario Castillo is the Director of Foreign Trade Division. All his colleagues, which have been instrumental in the preparation of this document. Fortunately, we have KGE Noe, Sebastián Herreros, Nano Mulder, and Jose Duran, of course, and many others in the area of publications. This document has three portions, which I will like to present today. Has a chapter on the foreign trade situation, the global landscape, whether it has been a recovery, which we see it as a non-symmetric, heterogeneous recovery in a high uncertainty context. And thus, recovery of foreign trade will be discussed, and also how we have seen global reconfiguration with the upset global chains. There have been a disruption, a crisis of supply and value chains. And of course, this has led an especially developed country to go for a reconfiguration, more self-sufficiency in terms of production, and a certain regionalization. And of course, what are the uncertainty factors of this recovery? In this report, we'll be analyzing the regional situation, especially asymmetries in both in the region compared to the world and within the region, and the impact of raw material prices. Our region is exporting prices and importing volumes. We'll see that. And the intra-regional trade, which is the best, especially for small and medium companies and businesses. And in the integration agenda, why integration agenda is so important, and we'll focus on the chapters 2 and 3 on two important things. One is healthcare industry, where I believe we had to identify the urgency of being more self-sufficient in terms of healthcare, the industry of healthcare, both the pharma and equipment, and how we solve the resiliences in terms of a digital aspect. And we address an innovative topic, which is what to do to drive circular economy. So let's start with an overlook now of world trade. There's a strong recovery seen in 2021, although with signs of a slowdown. And of course, we have, as you can see, foreign trade shows a much greater drop compared to 2008, 2009 crisis. The drop today as a result of the COVID is smaller, and recovery is also smaller. That is, back then in the crisis, there was a drop of a minus 12.6, and the recovery is up to 13.9. As we see, this is a long view between 1990 and 2020. And on the right, we clearly see the fact that of the behavior. Why 2020, the drop is a 5.3, and there's a drop that, I mean, on a quarterly basis, we see that between April or in April 2020, the drop was a minus 16.9%, and there is a recovery all the way up to 24.6 when we analyze between January 2017 to August 2021. And there we see a slowdown of 8.2. There is always a certain slowdown in the trade outlook for 2021 and 2022. Of course, the pandemic increased the imbalances in the global current account because there are certain countries. Look, we see here several things. The surplus of China will increase due to greater exports in medicines, electronics, and tourism. And we see how China, it's with a surplus development in the orange portion on the left. On the other hand, there are advanced countries with the surplus. Germany, classically, is one of them, and with the deficit, such as the U.S. This is accounted for by geopolitics. U.S. is still a deficit country, unlike China, and that explains objectively what is happening worldwide. The higher oil prices will offer a big advantage to oil exporters, especially, I mean, in 2021, a bit more than 2022, and the greater fiscal expenditure will increase the deficit in the country. On the other hand, we also see uncertainty factors in the world trade. There is an unequal vaccination rate and new strains, Omicron. And okay, unless we kill the virus, we'll be learning the whole Greek alphabet. We know this new strain and inflation pressures. This is important to mention. We will be analyzing this without the preliminary balance early January, but the inflation pressures are coming from different ways. The transportation issues, the great increase in the transportation prices, as we'll see, but also there is the greater aggregated demand, and of course difficulties to keep the fiscal stimuli. Trade tensions, but also a real estate risk in China. The main company in China has had certain problems in terms of the real estate and the real estate industry, which may have an impact on raw material exported from our region, and disruptions in the supply chains and an increase in freight rates. And the other big topic addressed in Glasgow, which is the extreme events due to climate change. So here we see the asymmetries, what we said before. Mid to high income countries, they have at least with one, we have a 76.6%, at least with one dose, high with this 74.1. And this is not because they don't have access to vaccine, but that there is no willingness to get vaccinated, which is what happens in the mid to high, which is 43.5, and the low income, definitely those that haven't had access to vaccination. And there, of course, Africa, it's the leading region in this problem. And on the right, is the different groups or clusters in terms of fiscal measures. Look at the differences. Advanced economies and additional expenditure and capital loans guarantees, they have injected lots of money as a percentage of GDP, and advanced economies are those that are showing big asymmetries. This is the big message from our document. There's the huge asymmetries among advanced economies, emerging economies, and of course, low income countries, especially as far as capital loans and guarantees. The US, we see there is a a world economy, which is far more regionalized. These crises, this is supply crisis. The U.S., Europe are trying to reduce their dependence, and here we clearly see how China has kept a leadership position, of course, and has been able to continue to be the number one exporter of parts and components, and became the number one exporter of medical devices. US has reacted, as well as the EU, and so they're trying to increase the productive economy in the strategic sectors, such as semiconductors, the electric vehicles, that of course has had a big impact in the tech between the US, Mexico, and Canada, batteries, medicines, critical minerals, green hydrogen, cloud computing technologies. And what are the instruments they've be using? Subsidies, public investments we saw before, public procurement, and lots of incentive to nearshoring and reshoring. That is, bringing their businesses back, at least closer geographically, and the impact on world patterns of production and trade. One of the conclusions that these impacts will not be seen immediately, but I do believe it will have a strong structural impact, especially in the coming years, and especially if these impacts of these patterns become something more structural. So China exports of parts and components. It's leading, followed by Germany, US, and Japan are following the same direction.
Esto es lo que quizás es nomás lo novedoso de esta crisis, ¿verdad? Porque en realidad esta crisis nos ha llevado a estas restricciones de oferta de insumos críticos, ¿verdad? Miren ustedes los tiempos de espera entre un pedido y la entrega, por ejemplo, de los semiconductores que son claves en la producción digital, ¿verdad? O en la producción automotriz. Las dificultades de transporte y logística, el tiempo promedio de tránsito marítimo de los contenedores. Y aquí comparamos, bueno, el tiempo normal en América del Norte eran 42 días. Bueno, el tiempo actual ahora son 51, aumentó 9 días. En el tiempo normal hacia Europa, 79 era el normal y ahora es 99 días. O sea, realmente hay un cambio que se traduce en precios. Y la reducción de inventarios, ¿verdad? Eso también ha sido muy importante, sobre todo en lo que se refiere a meses de ventas y ventas minoristas, que también tiene un gran impacto en el comercio. También vamos a observar en esta etapa, ¿verdad?, cómo hay un alza en el costo de los fletes marítimos de un 660%, que ha incidido en factores estructurales de mucho impacto, la verdad. Entonces, ahí tenemos realmente que observar que dos cosas, yo diría, algo sumamente delicado, y es que este es uno de los sectores más críticos en el fuerte aumento de los fletes, y entre el 50 y el 75% de los contenedores utilizados en el comercio internacional pertenecen a compañías navieras, y la mayor parte del resto a compañías de leasing que podrían constituir holdings, por ejemplo. Y los altos niveles de fletes resultan en muchas ganancias para el sector naviero, y existen 3 alianzas principales que concentran el 83% del mercado mundial del comercio marítimo vía contenedores. Fíjense, ahí está Ocean, 30%, ¿verdad? 2M, Maersk y MSC, el 34%. Y D, que es Hapag Lloyd, el 16%. Y otros el 20%. Pero en verdad que lo que estamos hablando es que no solamente hay un alza en los costos, sino hay una concentración en muy pocas manos y una gran integración vertical entre puertos y navieras que han formado alianzas. Entonces, esto es un tema que ya venía desde antes, nadie está diciendo que esto no existía, pero miren ustedes cómo ha aumentado el costo global de los fletes de contenedores por vía marítima entre enero de 2019 y octubre del 2020. 20. Entonces ahí está una de las claves de por qué se está impactando tanto la inflación. Eso es un caso, por ejemplo, en Chile, muy claro. Las perspectivas del comercio regional, que es lo habitual que presentamos nosotros. Y aquí lo que vemos es que el comercio, ¿verdad? El comercio se recupera en el primer semestre de 2021, ¿verdad? De manera muy importante. Y vemos que las exportaciones, en realidad, en nuestra región, sí tienen en el primer semestre una rápida recuperación con todos los socios, ¿verdad? Con todos nuestros socios hay una importante recuperación, de tal manera que el valor de las exportaciones totales de bienes de la región aumentó un 31% respecto a un mismo periodo y las importaciones un 29%, ¿verdad? Entonces vemos que, un 29% las importaciones. Entonces vemos que hay una recuperación muy importante de la región respecto al mundo, por cierto.
About the world, what is important, it says 34% for the period between January and June 2021, from January to June 2000. Well, we see the drop of minus 25%. And in 2021, we see a very important recovery, both of imports and exports. Well, we see one of the most important exports in the region are the ones that are focused on China. Those achieve 40% to China. Exports to the US are also important, 28%. But China is the main partner, both in imports and exports. And in the case of goods and services, the asymmetries are huge of how goods and services recover, and how we do not have the same situation in terms of goods. And we see here that this is one of the large asymmetries. One of is the recovery of goods services versus this service trade. And large categories broken down actually are evidence of the evidence, such as mining and oil, and manufacturing also recovers. Agricultural products are a little lower, but all the goods reflect that recovery of 31%. Now, services, we see a significant drop, especially because of collapse of the tourism industry, in which in the first half of 2020, we see a drop of minus 10%, significant drop in all services. And what really drops is tourism and transportation. So that is associated definitely to the industry. No country has been able to recover to pre-pandemic levels. So this is also very important. Countries in South America, Argentina, Chile, Colombia, Peru, and Uruguay have not been able to recover the comeback of tourists in this case. But Mexico, we see that Mexico is one, when you break down the region between South America and North America and Mexico and the Caribbean. There we see a significant recovery in the case of Mexico, undoubtedly. And in the case of Dominican Republic, there's also a significant recovery. But also in most cases, especially in the Caribbean, this has meant a loss of close to 700,000 jobs in 2020, in which the most widely affected have been women. Here we see goods imports that grow in all their categories, definitely, but they drop in terms of the share of capital goods. So imports keep their historical pattern. The imports in the region also showed a generalized increase in the first half of 2021. However, we clearly see here how between January and June in 2020, the drop was significant of all goods approximately, but between January to July in 2021, we see a significant recovery in terms of fuel, consumption items, and intermediate inputs. And what we highlight is the lower share of capital goods, and intermediate inputs are also important. But for us, the fact that there's not enough dynamics in the capital goods is associated to investment issues. Exports grow, as I said at the beginning, fundamentally with the prices. The thing in our region is that we export price. Clearly, in orange, you see prices. In how in our region we fundamentally export that, the prices. And in terms of volume, there was an important moment. But once again, predominance is about prices. Now, in terms of imports, volume is what predominates. And what we import basically are truly added value items. So we would like to state again that our region keeps going back to the import of primary goods, and now basic inputs price increase is what has make the goods import more dynamic. We clearly see here what are the products that have a better price. Iron, 99%. Natural gas, 81%. Copper, 64%. These are the minerals that show significant dynamism in the period, but lower impact from food products. But all incomes of raw materials between January and June of 2021 compared to the same period in 2020 show a significant or remarkable increase. And predominance is of gold, is one of the minerals that shows a significant growth. Minerals in general, we've already mentioned it. Basic inputs a little lower, but we see that there's a significant thrust from energy and metals. For 2021, these are the forecasts we have for next year. We clearly see now what we said at the beginning, that exports, and we see how in 2021, there's a important drive in terms of export, but in 2022, we see a slowing down. Once again, predominance of price in 2021, as we said it, 17% versus 8%, which is volume. But if we add that, it's 25% for 2021, and in 2022, this slows down both in terms of price and in volume. Imports, likewise, we do have an impulse of 32%, and next year a slowing down. Well, this is mainly due to the fact that prices may become more stable, but also the cost of transportation will remain an issue. Once again, we see a more dynamic trade with China. Again, this is one of the issues that is addressed here, of course. And again, our exports, if we focus on price on China, is 30% versus 5% in terms of volume. And we see this same trend practically to all our export destinations, except for the US. In the US, the price is below volume, and this has a lot to do with Mexico that does export. Central America and Mexico do export manufactured products to the US, but outside there, the pattern in Latin America in general and the Caribbean is very much focused on price more than in volume. And in terms of imports, once again, we see clearly that we are importing volume more than price. So we are net importers of goods with added value, and we export mostly raw materials. In spite of the increase in terms of intra-regional exports, which is good news, there's a higher drive in terms of intra-regional exports, but we're still below the maximum historical figures that reached 21% at some point. So really, this is an issue that we must observe carefully in the region to see how we can achieve a higher drive for intra-regional trade, which is the one that will probably help us the most to add value to our products. The maximum historical figure was achieved in 2008 and also back in 94, but we have not reached a historical maximum, and we should make a larger effort. Now, exports will grow. There will be differences among countries, and this is something that I believe is very important to show. In this chart, you can see we have grouped countries, we have clustered groups. And this is a new way of showing this, where we see what are the main asymmetries inside. We saw asymmetries with the world, and now we're looking at asymmetries within our own region. And here we can clearly see how Central America and Mexico focus their export on manufactured goods, and there's more presence in terms of volume, lower presence in terms of price. Agro and minerals are focused in South America, where we see the trend of going back to primary goods exports, minerals basically, and grouping the hydrocarbons exporters and natural gas exporters, with Trinidad and Tobago, Bolivia, Venezuela, Colombia, where price dominates. So very simply put, we can see what is the behavior of goods exports, trade, and what is the relationship between volume and price, looking at those asymmetries. There are countries that are in deficit, Cuba, Barbados, Antigua and Barbuda, and San Vicente and the Grenadines. And basically, it's associated, in this case, of course, to a large extent to tourism. This is the differentiated impact of the exchange terms. This is well, those who have positive numbers in terms of in the exchange terms are hydrocarbons, agro-industrial exporters, minerals exporters, and the ones that are in deficit, having negative numbers, is in the Caribbean and Mexico. In Latin America, in Mexico, we have oil exporters that are the ones that have better exchange terms than something that we already discussed. So after this outlook of trade in the region, here we have the issue of productive autonomy in the region in the healthcare industry. This is something extremely important for us at ECLAC. Recently, we showed the health self-sufficiency plan in Mexico in the SELAC meeting in September 18th that was approved unanimously. And really what we want to show you here is what is the situation of the world trade on the healthcare industry. On the one hand, medications, and on the other hand, the provision of medical equipment and devices. So on the left, we see, first of all, the healthcare industry is quite complex. Here we are breaking down medications and medical devices, but there are many other things involved, because we see raw materials, drugs, devices, and manufacturing for the pharmaceutical industry. What we need to show here is what is the behavior of the main exporters worldwide of medications. And undoubtedly, Germany is at the top. Of course, all developed countries, and especially European countries, that are the ones that mostly export medications or drugs out of their total exports, and worldwide exporters of medical devices, China. China is highlighted, of course, the US, that has increased its export levels, but really we're talking about China. China is the country that has grown the most in terms of medical devices exports, actually winning over the US, Germany, the Netherlands. When we look at the figures for 2020, which was the most important year in terms of export of drugs and medical devices. The healthcare industry, we know it, and the world knows it, that it is one of the most R&D intensive industries, and but our region is way behind. We have below 1% of the world patents in this sector, and we really see that R&D as a proportion of sales and of the main pharmaceutical companies in the world. Look at this R&D total sales, medication and drugs. We have 24% is retained by the main pharmaceutical companies, and also the share of patents granted in pharmaceutical sectors and medical technologies worldwide. And here we see that in terms of medical technologies, 0.29% of those for Latin America and the Caribbean, so practically nothing, or 0.75% in terms of pharmaceutical companies. So that's below 1% in both cases. But in one case, which is medical technologies, we are even at 0.29% of patents. The region has a persistent commercial deficit in the pharma sector. Only 13% of its exports come from the region itself. This is where the problem is, the key problem, our huge dependence on outside. When talking about pharmaceutical products where our balance is absolutely in deficit, we are mostly importers. We export very little. And whenever we do, we export to our own region mostly. But after that, the distribution by origin of those imports are basically from the European Union, from the US, undoubtedly, and for Latin America, that 13% comes precisely from Latin America into Latin America itself. So the European Union is the main origin of imports for pharmaceutical products, even more than the US. And the pharmaceutical industry in Latin America shows low productive integration within the region. Latin America, it's in red. And when we look at the situation of Asia or China or the US, where you see the significant productive integration among them, and well, we should focus on here on the European Union and, of course, the rest of Asia.
Regional exports of medical devices have been quite dynamic, of course, during the last 10 years. The region has made quite a progress in terms of exports, of course. Imports is always greater, and there is always a negative balance, except for one period where we had a positive balance between 2016 and 2019. And what's the origin of these exports of medical devices? Mexico, mainly, but Costa Rica and Dominican Republic are quite noteworthy. They've made a great effort in terms of exports of medical devices, and they have brought in foreign companies into their countries from where they export these devices. So it is important, because if we want to be self-sufficient and greater regional integration, these countries, Costa Rica and Dominican Republic and Mexico, will play a major role in medical devices. In summary, the commercial dynamic of the region is quite different in pharma industry compared to medical devices. Pharma industry, we play a minor role, 1.1% of the world exports. There's still that deficit, especially in patented and molecules, patented drugs and and molecules. The three main exporters are Brazil, Mexico, and Argentina, and the main destinations are the region itself and the US and European Union lagging behind. The main origin is the European Union and the US and the region, especially Brazil and Mexico play a role there. But again, it's for generics rather than patented drugs or molecules. The relevant experts of Latin American laboratories are mainly generics. For medical devices, 5.5% of the world exports, and that's the role we play. It's still quite low, but greater than in pharma. A trade closer to balanced with three main exporters, Mexico, Costa Rica, and Dominican Republic. The main destination is the US, the main origin, the US, again, China, and only 4% from within the region. I mean, imports of medical devices there again, the US plays a major role. Exports are almost all from transnationals in the region. As I said, many North American or US companies established in Mexico, Dominican Republic. So regional integration is key if we really want to make progress in decreasing the vulnerability of the region and the dependence of the region on the healthcare industry. The pandemic showed our high reliance on medicines, vaccines, and medical devices. So UN asked ECLAC to prepare this healthcare self-sufficiency as the world economies are doing. And so we have submitted this plan, which was approved unanimously, focused on several topics, generating a scale and to leverage complementarities using public procurement more strategically, implementing a regional platform for clinical trials, strengthening convergence and regulatory recognition, and promoting public-private consortia for research and production of drugs, vaccines, and medical devices. And we're adding the academia here, including the academia with the Politécnico Nacional in Mexico, BioCuba Pharma in Cuba, Universidad de Chile here in Chile. I mean, a consortia and analyzing the existing consortia between Mexico and Argentina to produce AstraZeneca. So that's the plan which I would like you to analyze in further detail. The last portion of this report has to do with how we move into a more digital, a more sustainable regional trade. So we see a very interesting phenomenon, not only in our region. It's that the electronic e-commerce has grown quite rapidly in Latin America. Clearly, we see here how this has grown 37%. That's a growth of e-trade procurement, e-commerce purchases as well. Other countries were already there, the US, the EU, but in Latin America, and in 2020, it was a huge surge by 37%. And of course, we've analyzed what are the e-commerce platforms which has been more widely used, both local and foreign. And here in 2021, of course, the domestic or the so-called domestic, which are actually franchises from foreign companies. They have grown by 86%, foreign by 40%, AliExpress, Amazon, eBay, Wish. But we clearly see here's a huge growth, both income, but already established businesses, but which are actually foreign franchises. And of course, it is urgent to promote an intra-regional e-commerce agenda. These will promote the penetration, access, the quality of digital connectivity, will promote participation of SMEs, which is key. We saw that in the Mercado Libre, which is a very important platform in South America, which has pushed the greater participation of 2 B2B and as and SMEs, but we have to upgrade the regulatory framework for these digital payments, and we have to speed up logistics for exports and imports so that there is a quick delivery within the territory. And our territory has challenges, big geographic barriers, which in Europe are not so big, or even the US, but now our region, especially in South America, these are huge. To have to produce statistics, we have to measure so as to see where do we have to focus our attention to have more effective policies. The regulatory framework and regional cooperation is key. We do believe that e-commerce and digital market are a path that we have to evaluate. On December the 13th, we will have a meeting of science and technology where we'll be analyzing these topics of the region. This is an important subsidiary agency which will be chaired by Argentina. So please join us then. And of course, we are analyzing in this document something which is very important: how trade can contribute to circular economy, building new markets, new technologies. And there we believe it's important what's happening, especially in waste trade, and how these may work so that the extraction of resources has some sort of a return. Recycled goods, especially that are focused on agriculture, but definitely it is important to go into remanufacture used goods trade and generate a service a trade based on circular strategies. Of course, in our case, in our region, exports are basically focused on recycled products from agricultural wastes. In the world, the non-biological wastes are those that prevail compared to biological. In our region, it's the other way around. Biological waste prevail over non-biological because they require non-biological require more technology, and that's why that's again that should be our goal, to added value. We have to add technology to circularity so as to achieve non-biological products can be treated, recycled, such as the case of plastics, such as the case of many other products from oil, which may be reused. And biologicals, of course, there again, we can act strongly in fishing, aquaculture, livestock, and of course, agriculture wastes. And we have to move faster to glass, textile wastes, and the paper, pulp and paper industry, and forestry, and machinery and manufacturing. There again, many of these products may be converted for construction. Big plastic boards, which are being used greatly for construction. So how can we do this? How to make the region to include in their trade agendas these circular economy perspective and the national agenda in the standardization of standards by lowering the barriers. That's one of the big problems the region has, by integrating circular economy in commercial agreements in order to have more access, and by increasing inputs and recycled products in the chains of exporting sectors, especially mining, agro-industry, and forestry. Our last thoughts on the global scenario. There is a recovery, an important recovery in 2021, but also we see that for foreign trade, global trade, the outlooks are sort of threatened by sanitary, by health, and economic risk. There's disruptions in the supply chains and the high ocean freight. In summary, the uncertainty on this new Omicron strain, the limited space the economy has accepted in developed countries in order to keep fiscal and monetary stimuli, and of course, this competition between China and the US, which places our region in a difficult situation, and the weakening of the multilateralism, the postponement of the World Trade Organization meeting, it's a matter of concern for us. And of course, the US and the EU are trying to reduce their dependence on China. I mean, in a strategic industry for critical inputs. And the most probable scenario is a globalized regionalization, shortening supply chains, and a more and more important role of these relevant agreements, such as the comprehensive agreement signed by China and many of the other countries, the economic association, the comprehensive, the RCEP with the 15 countries of Asia, TPP 11 and TMEC, which are big mega regional agreements are growing very strong because they're all looking for regional proximity. For the region, in the region, export recovery is positive, of course, but it has certain structural weaknesses. We're still exporting goods driven by the increased price of raw materials, which are we haven't done a good job in transforming our export profile, and the imported volume is much greater than the exported volume, 20 against 8. Manufacturing exports, automotive in Mexico are being affected by disturbances in supply chains. Interregional trade should be a great expectation, but there's still below the historical peaks, and service exports are not recovered, and this is a big problem for certain countries, I mean for everyone, and this may be affected, that the reopening may be affected by this Omicron strain. So export recovery is still based on static comparative advantages rather than the diversification into products and services with a greater greater content and a smaller environmental footprint. So we're still betting, that's the big issue. The region is still betting on extra regional markets given an economy which is becoming more and more regional. So we are going in the other way, or the wrong way. So it's key to go deeper into production integration and commercial integration to reach scale. And for that, we believe in order to diversify export and reduce exposure to external shocks, one of them, of course, is in autonomy, productive autonomy in critical elements, which can help us greatly into a greater productive integration. The same is true for digital markets that will promote a greater interregional trade, supporting SMEs to creating new digital products. Our region, I would say, it's very much in tune with innovations, but we also need to move to go universal in terms of access to digitization. And of course, circular economy, which we addressed in this report as a new thing. So, my dear colleagues, that's what we would like to share with you today. And of course, we are open to your questions. Thank you, Madam Executive Secretary. It has been a deep and long, thorough presentation of content and the main messages of this annual document for 2021. As you said, we will now offer the floor to our colleagues from the media, which are key to reach citizens and audiences in the region and around the world. Madam Executive Secretary, we'll have a first block of questions, if I may. Of the first 3 questions we have received. The first of them is from Jean Nunn. It's a correspondent from Xinhua News Agency. Jean has the following question. last December the 3, we had the third ministry meeting of CELAC with China. How would you feel about the achievements of these meeting after the pandemic? And also, how could you enhance cooperation and circular economy between China and the region? Jing Nan, correspondent from Xinhua. Second question by Margarita Bastias. She's with ANSA, the Italian agency. Margarita, again, two questions. The reading of the report on foreign trade shows that the inequality is also strong, and the only country that was well prepared in medical but for the pandemic, Mexico, actually, it seems the main operators are transnationals. Do you believe the pandemic will make easier to convince the more conservative sectors on the need to have a local pharma industry? A second question by Margarita Bastias with ANSA. ECLAC has told countries to strengthen their production, but but these countries were affected by the pandemic, unlike the exporters of natural resources. Did the pandemic enhance these curves of Latin America and the natural resources? Margarita Bastias with ANSA in the third block. Madam Executive Secretary, Alina Achundia from La Razón, from Mexico. How will be foreign trade affected by the measures that are trying to apply fiscal stimuli to local manufacturers and the perspective of for Mexico in 2022? What's the outlook for Mexico in 2022? With these three questions are from Jingnan, Xinhua y ANSA, and La Razón from Mexico. The floor is yours. Thank you. That's my pleasure. To Jingnan from Xinhua, China, in Chile. Yes, in this third Ministry of China's CELAC meeting, which I attended, I should say that it's yet again another element in the deepening of our cooperation. There were several topics to be addressed between China and Latin America and the Caribbean. One of them was the Joint Action Plan, China-CELAC, for cooperations in key areas 2022-2024, which contained important proposals to extend the scope of the relationship between the region and China. For instance, the strengthening of exchange for the promotion, trade, and investment and commercial associations and services, for instance, that may support the economic ties. There has been an increase of Chinese investments in Latin America. Quite importantly, trade has always been important, but investments have grown and have grown in a more diverse industries such as energy, where of course the mergers and acquisitions prevail, but we're still recipients of important Chinese investments. On the other hand, I would say that the foundations are quite dynamic. In 2020, China was the only relevant market onto which our export increased by 2%. And the first half of 2020 and the first half of 2021, exports from our region into China increased by 40%. So that was bigger than any other destination that our region had in terms of exports. And of course, in terms of imports from China accounted for 33%, increased the imports inter-regional. That's a good news. But from China, of course, there was we had these a big increase. Now, we still have to diversify our exports into China. We're still focused on raw materials, and I believe in healthcare. China. We have shown that China it's one of the key producers for pharmaceutical and devices imports into the region. But progresses have been made between China, Latin America, and the Caribbean in terms of vaccines. China has delivered 269 million doses to the region, and there are building installation building of plants in Chile, Colombia, Brazil, and Mexico for filling and finishing, and other facilities in Chile and Colombia. These will increase the capacity of our region for the production of vaccines. The self-sufficiency plan, of course, that's another opportunity. We've submitted that to China, and I did that, and that we would say that the self-sufficiency plan, it's a driving force where China can join also in renewables energies. China, of course, has become a powerful producer of electric batteries, thus adding value in the case of lithium in the region is something worthwhile working on. These circular cooperation in the, and of course, China, it's the #1 country in the world in approving a law for circular economy and introduced a concept called ecological civilization into the 2018 constitution. So China is a pioneer because they have technologies and experience in a series of industries that are key for recycling. So we believe that China may reinforce its collaboration with Latin America and the Caribbean in terms of recycling and reutilization of wastes from electric devices, electronic devices, and also by improving traceability. There is a huge opportunity there, and we could also receive cooperation from China for agricultural wastes, how we can turn that into input, bioplastics, which is one of the big topics, one of the hot topics that in this region we could produce, which will be really important for both sides, I would say.
We'll go to Margarita Bastidas, journalist of ANSA in Chile, where she says, she talks about the inequality, which is pretty strong, and what could be, what is the situation of Mexico in this context? So, and if we can convince conservative sectors in the region to have our own pharmaceutical industry, of course, yes, this is exactly what we are doing. I would say Mexico, precisely the healthcare self-sufficiency plan that Mexico requested ECLAC, and which was unanimously approved at CELAC. It's an important step because to some extent, during the pandemic, we suffered from disruptions and supply problems with ingredients and drugs, just like the rest of the world. So we saw the evidence of the huge dependence we have on exports. Only 13% of pharmaceutical imports and 4% of medical imports come from our own region. So it is an imperative to increase our regional autonomy in terms of production, and we truly believe this is being done by the US and Europe. Of course, they are ahead of us, and China, undoubtedly. But several countries in Latin America have started already very important initiatives. I'd like to highlight the local production of vaccines. Cuba, of course, is at the forefront, but also Brazil, Chile, Argentina, Mexico are moving fast to do the same. And of course, the production of mechanical ventilators, respirators, many companies have reinvented themselves, so to speak. They did re-engineering to their structures to be able to supply these devices, even masks, face masks, that those are produced locally now. But what we must have is to have a scale market, to have a regional capability, to have the correct scale, because vaccine production, and this is going to go on because it seems the pandemic is not ending. It's just a virus that transforms itself. We do not know what's happening in the future. So we do know a broad and stable vaccine market, but in medications in general. But of course, yes, our region needs to move in that direction. And to some extent, it is also true that manufactured goods exports were not the ones that benefited the most. Well, as usual, we have these two realities in parallel. On the one hand, raw materials exporters, such as the case of oil, minerals, mainly focused in South America, were the winners on price of those raw materials, and not so much on volume, but on price. And of course, the net importers of energy and food, such as the case of Central America and the Caribbean, not all of them, of course, but almost all of them are the ones that do not have improved exchange terms. But I would say in terms of manufacturing, we have interesting situations, such as Mexico and Central America, that were able to drive their manufacturing efforts towards the US. And the main losers are the ones who export services, because there's a significant loss due to tourism, mainly. But in the production of manufactured goods or agricultural products and in all goods, our region showed a better performance, especially between January and June 2021, with a 31%, which is a very important recovery. Alina Archundia of La Razón, Mexico. Well, your question is, what is the impact of on foreign trade, the inadequate or measures that the United States applies? Well, between 2010 and 2017, the production of cars in Mexico grew by 8.2%. That is to say, an average rate. This was the highest rate in the world. So growth between 2010 and 2017 was the highest in the world in terms of car manufacturing. So Mexico in world car manufacturing went from 3% in 2010 to 4.1% in 2020. So in today's place number 6 among the most important car manufacturers in the world, and the first one in Latin America. 950,000 jobs in 2020. The car industry contributed with 20% of manufacturing jobs and 3% of the national GDP. So the car industry generated more income than the oil industry itself, and even more income comparing remittances and tourism. This is a 26% compared to 15.4 of the all others activities together. So for every $100 in exports, 36 come from the car industry. So there's a very positive commercial evolution between 2009 and 2017, especially with a surplus of 18.7 to $70.7 billion. Now, the US accounts or represents the most relevant trade partner in 2017. It accounted for 83.2% of the exports that were sent from Mexico, and 53% came from imports into Mexico. So clearly there was a certain level of deficit. So what I believe is important is that we need an active industrial policy that strengthens Mexico capabilities in that sense. And in that context, it's true. That is the bill that is under discussion that will intend to grant $20.5 billion to in fiscal credits, basically, to national consumers who buy electric vehicles produced in the US. That is what is at stake here. And the objective of promoting electromobility, yes, discriminates Mexico and Canada. Really, these measures are affecting Mexico and Canada in terms of electromobility. And this also violates the rules of the World Trade Organization, because there's a preference for what it's manufactured in the US. And this has been also expressed by other partners in the case of the EU. So the Mexican government, to a large extent, is analyzing whether they would take this dispute panel as part of the free trade agreement between their country and Canada and the US, or to the WTO. And Mexico is also considering some reprisal, the trade level as well. And there's the expectation that this bill in the Senate may be amended so that the promotion of electromobility be done without the detriment to the partners of the US. So the Mexican car industry represents two key challenges, is faced two challenges: to keep its space, its share of the market that has been gained in the last decade, and second, to develop competencies, because there will be demand for technology conversion in terms of connectivity, autonomy, shared mobility, and electromobility. Of course, it's really important for this fiscal incentive proposal to electromobility in the US it most probably will be the tip of a much larger iceberg, because it will mean significant challenges to the Mexican car industry. So there will be an undeniable need to innovate in this industry. The last question asked by in this last block by our dear Alina Archundia from La Razón is, what's the outlook of foreign trade for 2022 and the main challenges? The first one, I believe Mexico is a winner. The expectation is for Mexican exports to keep expanding, and really they will show a good performance. Mexico has good perspectives in terms of foreign trade. And I do believe that also Mexico is within that curve, or that segment of the curve, where we say first that exports, at least in 2021, show significant growth of 17%, but most of all, they are precisely in that area of manufacturing. And I believe it is important. In 2022, the growth expectation is lower compared to 2021, but that's because the whole world economy will slow down. The expectation is for Mexican exports to grow close to 8%. That is to say, 4% in volume and another 4% in price. So this is one of the economies that is more balanced in terms of volume and price. The major challenge is, of course, to keep this exporting drive. And in fact, as of October of 2021, we already see that manufacturing has been reduced, and especially in the car industry. That's exactly what we were just discussing before. There's uncertainty, of course, because of this potential legislation of incentives to EV. That might have an impact on the Mexican industry, but the car making industry should be ready. And the forecast for 2022 is that Mexican exports will show an expansion of 8%, 5% in terms of volume, 3% in price. That's the outlook, Guido. So you have the floor again. Thank you very much, Mrs. Bárcena. We are going to consider the next three questions from our colleagues. Romuald Figueroa, head of EFE. According to the report, the service provision in the region has not been recovered, mostly because of the plunge in tourism. Has this been the sector with the biggest impact because of the COVID? Didn't the government measure the impact? Fabian Andres Cambero, Thomson Reuters, with the following questions. Part of the recovery of economies that depend on raw materials is because of the impact of China. What would be the impacts on countries because of China's slowdown, the lower prices of raw materials such as copper for the next year, what would be the impact of those economies that rely on raw materials, consider that many of them are not recovering the volumes? Finally, Javier Andres Cambero, the emergence of new concerns such as Omicron could change these perspectives, the ones that we have considered today. And the third question of this segment by Yvette Saldaña, our dear Yvette Saldaña from El Universal in Mexico. Yvette states the following question, part of what you just covered in the previous answer to La Razón, but maybe there are some aspects that you would like to cover in this. What is the concern about the different interpretations between the US and Mexico about the application of the TEMEC, the free trade agreement of North America, maybe tariff reprisals, the case of rules of origin in the case of car making industry. So with these three concerns, Ruben Figueroa, EFE, Fabián Andrés Cambero from Thomson Reuters, and Yvette Saldaña from El Universal de Mexico. The floor is yours again. Thank you, and I'm glad to answer these questions by Ruben Figueroa, correspondent of EFE. Thank you for being with us. It's a pleasure to have you with us again. And to tell you that, yes, the plunge in the tourism market is very sensitive in our region, and we have analyzed it with care in this report, and we see that for the most affected countries, of course, in 2020, I would say up to August 2021, with the arrival of international tourists between 2019 and 2021, which is what we covered in our report. And really, we do see that there is a remarkable drop in the number of tourists, especially in 2020. Certain arrivals, international arrivals in Argentina, maintained close to a million people that arrived in Argentina, but this fell significantly as of March 2020. That's when the pandemic starts. The most widely affected countries are Argentina, Chile, Colombia, Peru, and Uruguay. Colombia, slightly less in the case of South America. For the rest, I would say Mexico is one of the countries between January and September this year. Only Mexico and Dominican Republic recovered part of their tourism activity. And the outlook for the future have a lot to do with what's going to happen in the coming months in the Southern Hemisphere. In the Southern Hemisphere, as we know, we always right now, for example, contagion in the Southern Hemisphere are slightly lower. Omicron is arriving everywhere, but it has not yet arrived with the strength that it is already affecting Europe and other countries, and definitely the Caribbean. The Caribbean, especially the English-speaking Caribbean, is the most affected area by this crisis in tourism due to the COVID pandemic. Whether the impact was measured well or not, I believe this is what is being done. It's just the brutal drop in service trade in terms of traveling. For example, between January and June 2020, we see that the drop of traveling was minus 52%. And this year, between January and June 2021, the drop has been minus 37%. A slight recovery, but marginal. So I believe, yes, this has been seen as a very sensitive matter. What it cannot be seen is how this could be improved. The Caribbean has always been an important destination for the US. That's why vaccination in the Caribbean is so important. We cannot leave any country behind. But of course, Caribbean countries and Central American ones in our region are the ones that should be a priority in terms of vaccination, because are the ones that are lagging behind.
For that, of course, we need to recover this sector. The question from Fabián Andrés Candero with Thomson Reuters on what portion of the recovery of economies depending on raw material depends on China. What are the most affected countries? Well, those countries with minerals, for instance, Chile, Peru, and Brazil, to a lesser extent, those are exporting into China, especially these minerals, just copper, for instance, which is a very important mineral for China, not only for construction, but also for batteries and for the electromobility inputs. That's an important topic where the lithium will gain importance. So, but these are the countries that which are more dependent of Chile, Peru, and Brazil to a lesser extent. That they have seen an effect because of the adjustments to the prices of iron. Then we have agricultural or agro-industrial countries where Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, and of course, the least affected are the exporters of oil, because really that will depend on other expectations, not only China, but also US and the region itself. Mexico and Central America are very much influenced by what happens in the US, which is the #1 market, unlike China. So probably the most affected will be Latin America, South America rather, which is where we have bigger exports into China. Lower prices of certain raw materials. We already see raw material price outlook, which is less expensive than 2020. On average, we project an increase in prices of export of 6% in 2022, but this is only the 1/3 of the prices projected in 2021. 2021 prices, the sum was 17%. This year would be 6%, so 1/3. And therefore, yes, the prices will show a slowdown, and these will have an impact. And the exporters of these raw materials, okay, should expand their volumes in order to have the same performance. But it's a challenge. It's a challenge because of freight rates. So we'll have this slowdown, for which we expect a lower dynamism. Now, of course, South American exports can grow bigger into China, and but with this slowdown in terms of prices, new strains such as Omicron, of course, there are lots of uncertainties. What prevails today? It's uncertainty. Nobody knows. Nobody's able to say that will be more lethal. Infectious rate is much higher. Nobody. No, we cannot have immunity islands, and even though we're limiting travels from Africa or from other or continents, that is still the #1 risk we face ahead, and especially uncertainty. And the other big change in terms of the trade outlook, it's the Chinese real estate market, which is still a risk, especially by the default of Evergrande, which is a gigantic company that has gone into default. And other risk factors may be the high cost of ocean freight, which has disrupted the international supply chains, and especially for semiconductors. Yvette Saldaña, El Universal, our dear Yvette, it's always good to have you with us. And of course, yes, that's a concern that we share. What could happen with the situation in the application of interpretations, the different interpretations, as you say, in the application of the TMEC, which could end up in tariff retaliation, such as the rules of origin of the automotive industry, electric cars, and so forth. I would say, as I said before, it is a matter of concern for us. First, this bill being discussed in the US, proposing up to 12.5 billion to in fiscal no $12,500 to consumers buying electric cars. That's for individual consumers, $12,500 if they buy an electric cars produced in the U.S. That's one of the first matters of concern. And also, of course, what's happening in electromobility, because it offers preference to the products of manufactured in the U.S. and other partners that have acted in Mexico, for example, from the European Union, which also considered this measure as a discrimination. So, U.S. government, the Mexican government has this problem. It will take this to a controversy panel in the TMAX or in the World Trade Organization, and they have to make the decision whether to impose additional tariffs on other U.S.-based products as a retaliation measure, given this bill in Senate and in Congress, and without creating a commercial or trade conflict. But this is important for the Mexican automotive industry, has the challenge ahead of I mean, it has an important space, the automotive industry in Mexico. There has been a big deficit between the U.S. and Mexico, which is we're trying to balance, but Mexico should not lose that space gained, and therefore has to move into a quick technological reconversion to improve the production efficiency, electromobility, and thus let's hope this is not the tip of the iceberg of a bigger challenge between Mexico and the U.S. Thank you, Madam Executive Secretary. If I may, we are almost closing our time. 1/3 the block, if I may, but to our colleagues, of course, they have sent many more questions, but we will sending written answers to those questions which were not answered directly today in our live transmissions, in our live broadcast. So don't worry, we will try to send you the answers to those questions that will not be entertained here. So we'll read the last 3 questions in this section. Antonia Musiet, Radio Bio Bio, Chile. Where is Chile among countries in recovering the economy, and is there any forecast in terms of figures for Chile into 2022? Roberto Lameriñas, Valor Económico, Brazil. What are the factors that place post-pandemic recovery of industries in Latin America and the Caribbean that will make it slower than in our region? Is there any fear of a more acute or more severe deindustrialization in the country? What would be the reasons for that, if that is true? Deindustrialization in the countries of the region, and jobs and salaries. What countries are suffering greater losses? Silvia Rodriguez, Grupo Milenio, Mexico. What do you believe will be the exports given the logistics and supply difficulties? Do you believe that the administration is using T-Max to drive exports? Silvia Rodriguez from Milenio, Antonia Musiet, Radio Bio Bio, and Roberto Lameirinhas, Valor Económico in Brazil. Those are the last questions, Madam Executive Secretary. Okay, Antonia Musiet, Radio Bio Bio, Chile. Chile is among the countries with a greater expansion in terms of export in 2021. Definitely, I believe there will be a 26% for the whole year, 2021. The greater increases between January and October 2021 were exports of iron, 66%, molybdenum concentrate, copper cathode 47%, concentrate copper 44%, pulp is 64, salmon is 18, and wine 6%. They accounted for over 60% of total exports of the country. So in 2021, we expect these exports to reach the historical peak. Chile will be closing with a surplus of 15 billion US. This increase is accounted for by the increase with the surplus with Asia, mainly China. And in 2021, it's expected for Chile to have a positive shock in terms of trade. I mean, 13.6, given the remarkable increase in prices of exports. It's around 25%, which exceeded the price increase of exports, which was 10%. What are the outlooks for 2022? An increase by 8% for Chilean exports, with a combined increase of 4% prices for volume. There's a lower export dynamism accounted for by the lower growth of a world economy, and a reduction of copper prices. In the last few months, the behavior has been quite volatile. Risk of a real estate crash by Evergrande in this big real estate company in China, and a greater imbalance in supply and offer of copper for 2022, where we expect the increased bias is too low. The Cochilco forecast for 2022 price is $4.23 per pound, which is lower than the underlying projection in our report, which was $4.24 per pound in 2021. So there is a decline, an important decline, not big, but some decline. And for imports, we forecast a 6% increase, 3% prices, 3% by volume. Roberto Lameriñas, Valor Económico from Brazil. Yes, we do believe there's a risk of a deindustrialization, and of course, that will endanger the recovery of several industries after the pandemic. One of the main risks is the decline of investment in manufacturing. Yes, there is a greater manufacturing exports, but the high prices of raw materials are probably the most important factors to encourage deindustrialization. Incentive to the exports of primary of commodities over manufactured products has an evil effect on the manufacturing sectors. That means we're going back into commodities. This trend may be counteracted with more active policies and by reading at the market. Prices of raw materials will decline. So then this is the time to supplement with the increase in the manufacturing sector. So our countries should adopt the measures that should consider relevant, and of course leveraging the situation such as now for a greater productive integration both in Central America by enhancing inter-regional trade of manufacturing products, drugs, chemistry, metalworking, and in South America. This is an opportunity to strengthen the value of exports within the region. This is key. I mean, that will help to against this deindustrialization of the region. For jobs and salary, those with the greatest loss, or the most affected sector is services, huge losses, and especially a strong drop in labor in every country. The drop of employment was 11% in 2020, and it was much stronger in the informal market, affecting women and the young people compared to the rest of the population. So we believe this impact was very strong compared to 2019, and together with a the strong decline in terms of the global rate of 9.5%, and there has been a strong drop in terms of employment. Labor markets are not recovering. We 2021 we did see a revamp in 6% in terms of growth compared to the drop in 2020 of minus 6.8%. This year, our expectation is 6%, but it's not. The employment is not recovering at the same rate. In fact, 10 out of 14 countries in the quarterly data are not recovering the levels before the crisis. The bigger gaps are in Brazil, Colombia, Costa Rica, which are 7% below employment rates before the crisis. So these are some of the issues. Services, like I said, it's one of the most affected industries: recreation, events, tourism, restaurants, the return of women to care activities. It's a like a 1 decade setback. So that's one of the problems of greater concern. In some cases, employment has been retained, but salaries drop. So that's again one other topic that should be analyzed in the preliminary balance. We are analyzing employment in this report that will be presented early in January. Employment in agriculture and financial services showed a positive variation. In those industries, there was a better evolution, and salaries, as I said. And the challenge is this rearrangement, less jobs, lower salaries. Some companies retain their workers, but at a lower salary. And of course, there was a drop of the minimum salary, the real minimum wage, which dropped in 15 out of the 20 countries reporting information. And the other problem for 2021 is the evolution of inflation, which will have a key effect in the real salaries in 2021. The inflation rate in Latin America has been growing much greater than the last year. So that's another topic in the preliminary report. Silvia Rodriguez, our last question today. Grupo Milenio in Mexico. What will be the behavior of exports given the logistic issues and supply, especially for automotive industry? The manufactured product export reached in October 2021 $36.7 billion US, which accounted for a drop for 4% drop per year. That's a 2021, of course. And for automotive products, 21.8%, professional scientific equipment 3.9%, machinery and equipment 0.1%. So, and a decline in automotive products has been the result of reductions of sales into the US, and which was around 19%, and sales into other countries, which was 34.8%. Production and export of automotive industry in Mexico, yes, has been quite affected by COVID-19, especially in the last few months. And something which was the lack of supply of semiconductors that globally was one of the value chains which was more affected. So this has been reported by the Mexican Association of Automotive Industry, which could be a decrease between 4.7% and 5%. So the lack of supply of semiconductors for the automotive industry worldwide is seen as that it is believed that may extend into 2022. So the manufactured non-automotive exports show a recovery. Do you consider that this administration is using T-MEX to drive exports? Because there has been difficulties with discussions in terms of the foreign trade. The ninth leader of the North America leaders Canada, US, and Mexico addressed the importance of supply chains, with a special emphasis on medical supplies and the importance of strengthening and deepening their economic ties with measures supporting SMEs and good regulatory practices, promotion of competitiveness, protection to labor rights, and trade relations with a sound infrastructure and high environmental standards. And they also addressed inclusion and equality. A topic of interest for Mexico and Canada is the social measures and environmental measures, $1.7 billion pushed by President Biden, which is being negotiated in Congress. And of course, we have this fiscal or tax credit, $12,500 to all of those buying electric cars manufactured in the US. That's actually a subsidy. And these, of course, may affect the trade, Mexico and Canada especially, and other important topics as the panel for controversy resolution suggested by the US in order to address certain measures adopted by Canada as to dairy products and the electric reform in Mexico. So we know that the Secretary of Economics has had discussions with the US on the proposal of these fiscal or tax or fiscal incentives for electric vehicles, because this is discrimination against Mexico and Canada. And this is what is being discussed now. And they've requested formal technical discussions on the regional content of Mexican automotive industry, and the Mexican government can resort to Article 31, and they're in the process of deciding if we will take this to this controversy panel or to the World Trade Organization, also analyzing tariffs for other U.S. products as a retaliation if this bill passes. So Secretary of Economics said that, and I quote, that we cannot work so nice in one area with the U.S. when at the same time we're discussing subsidies to electric cars produced fully in the U.S. in the U.S. Congress. So that changes these trend of an integrated market achieved by the three countries, and Mexico then has strategic reserves of lithium for auto parts and semiconductors. So yeah, in that Mexico plays a good role in this debate of electric cars production. With that, let me close, Guido, this Q&A section. So back to you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to remind all our colleagues who are following up of this launch and press conference that on ECLAC webpage, you'll find all the support material, including the presentation by the Executive Secretary during this session, the document itself in its entirety, both in Spanish and in English, and in case of any other requirement in terms of public dissemination, we will be glad to release that information to you. Before closing this launch, I'd like to, Ms. Bárcena, that if I could ask you to leave us with a final message, or main ideas, main purposes that ECLAC has shown during this presentation. Well, thank you very much. Well, really, the most important part of this report is that we are in the face of an asymmetrical and heterogeneous recovery and under significant uncertainty. That is the tone, I believe, today. And of course, our region recovered in terms of exports, in terms of value by 25% after a drop of 10% in 2020. So this is a significant recovery, but how much this will be sustained? Well, that's part of the uncertainty we have. And what our countries should do to try and address this uncertainty. Undoubtedly, vaccination is one. We need to take a look carefully at these inflation pressures. Of course, a concern is the increased cost of freight and the scarcity of containers, the increase in transportation costs, but most of all, the big message is what can we do by ourselves? And this is the key, I believe, of a stronger support, more decisive support, and regional integration policy. And let's say it loud and clear, there's a great opportunity to address integration once again, of supporting productive integration, interregional trade, interregional investment in key sectors such as pharmaceuticals, medical devices. There's a huge opportunity there that should not go wasted in terms of digital technologies to create a digital market in South America and Central America so we can expand our digital capabilities. Of course, first of all, addressing the universalization of internet services to all households. We have a lot to do still. And in terms of climate change, the climate action in which our region has unique opportunities to address issues such as renewables, adaptation, nature-based solutions with our huge biodiversity in the region. And I can't close this without finally invited everyone to download and read this report. There's significant information there, for example, circular economy. And I'd like to thank the whole team that has collaborated in the development of this report, especially Mario Castillo, who is here with us today, Keiji Inoue, Jose Duran, Sebastián Herreros, who has supported me so much with questions and answers, Janet Larde, Jorge Junquino, Nano Mulder, Ricardo Sanchez, Dainisa Stevens, Eliana Bauleta. I'd like to thank all our offices in Buenos Aires, Brasilia, Mexico City, Bogota, Port of Spain, you, the press team, Guido and colleagues, the ICT team, and our always present publications division, led by Sally Shaw, who always supports us with all these publications. Thank you all. And let's see each other in our next launch that I believe is going to be very soon, which is about the social perspectives. Thank you. Thank you very much. So we thereby close this launch and press conference. Mrs. Bárcena has just expressed it. First, thankfulness to all of you here with us today to be present at the launch of this new proposal data for Latin America and the Caribbean, its perspectives, and very soon as well, very soon as it's been announced, we will be inviting you so that you can also be with us in the interaction of this ECLAC. Thank you all. I'd like to thank Secretary of ECLAC for her time and dedication to address these questions and to present this data that ECLAC uses, the structural parts that are so important in the development of our region. Thank you so much, everyone.
Recording stopped.